thoughts tonight. So welcome. This is the Millennium Park community meeting. It's the first meeting. It's in a series of 3 meetings. My name is Allison Perlman, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight with you all. I want to acknowledge those who were able to make this meeting tonight. I know it's hard to take time for these meetings, and people are feeling pretty, I guess, a lot of Zoom fatigue is what I've heard recently. But I do think that, just judging by the number of attendees is already up to 30, that this park is really special, that, as much as we are kind of being bombarded by Zoom meetings, we have 30 people here tonight to show us how important this park is. So whether you visit it for soccer games or walking or just going up, viewing meteors, I think this park is incredibly active and well loved. So I believe I wanted to welcome any electeds. I didn't see any in the attendees, but if I somehow missed you, just raise your hand, and so we can make sure that we acknowledge you. And if you want to say anything, we can let you have a minute. While you're doing that, I also want to just kind of jump into a few how-tos and what to expect tonight before we go into the presentation.
We have one hand raised, Allison.
Oh, great. Peter, do you want to say something?
Yes, my name is Peter Favorito. I'm just here from City Councilor Matt O'Malley's office. I'm just here to take some notes and see how the meeting goes.
Great. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Of course.
Okay, let's go to the next slide.
And Jack wants to say something.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Jack.
He lowered his hand really fast.
Hi, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jack Duggan. I'm also on the meeting as well. West Roxbury liaison for the mayor's office. And as Peter mentioned, just here to take notes and hear the feedback. And thanks for having us tonight.
Thanks,
Great.
Jack.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, so I want to acknowledge all those who are unable to attend tonight. We are recording the meeting and we'll post to the project website within a week. So please share what you learned tonight and direct your neighbors, friends, and family to our website, which is at the bottom of the slide here, for them to view when their schedule allows. Next slide. Tonight's meeting will be different from our past community meetings as circumstances have put most of our engagement activities online. Due to the size of the meeting, we chose a webinar style presentation by our design team, and then we will follow that by a question and answer discussion with you. This is fairly different from our in-person meetings. You can see us, but we can't see you. I certainly miss seeing all your faces. However, with this many people, we found the security measures are important to provide uninterrupted meeting. But we would love to hear your thoughts. So if you are on a computer or tablet, you can submit questions and comments via the question and answer feature, or you can select the raise hand feature, which is at the bottom of your screen. In the raise hand feature, you will ask your question verbally, and then the question and answer, you just type in your question or your comment. And we will address that during the question and answer discussion. I don't believe we have anybody on the phone. Christine, do we have anybody calling in?
No, we don't.
Okay, so I won't go over how you interact if you're on the phone. Next slide. We want to ensure this conversation feels accessible to everyone and each one of you feels comfortable sharing your questions and comments. Please be respectful and mindful of others' time so everyone has the opportunity to participate. Keep questions project specific and not personal to encourage conversation, which is solution driven. And once you've submitted or asked a question, please wait till others have an opportunity to ask questions before submitting another one. You can always also set up a conversation with me. You can contact me. You can see on the bottom there my email address, which is allison.perlman@boston.gov. So hopefully that takes care of all the housekeeping stuff. Let's move to the next slide. So tonight I will introduce our project team and provide a general project overview and goals. And our design team will present park history, site analysis, and playground equipment ideas to help generate discussion with you, all during the question and answer discussion, which will be after the presentation. Next slide. I'd like to acknowledge our exceptional team for the project. From the city, we are joined by Boston Park staff, Tom Timmons. He's the contract compliance manager for Millennium Park. I imagine many of you know who he is. He has spent many hours at Millennium Park, whether he's working to make sure the park is safe and well cared for, or he's just walking the pathways on his free time. We also are joined tonight by Christine Brandeo, our outreach coordinator. She helps establish Parks Friends groups. She's also a Zoom expert and one of our moderators tonight. And Jack introduced himself, but I just want to acknowledge all of his work with the community. I know that you help residents tap into city services and help facilitate neighborhood concerns. So thank you for joining us tonight, and thanks for being part of the team. And then from our, oh, and one more, I just realized that Commissioner Woods is here also, who has been a huge advocate to expanding access to the community on these public meetings and making sure to sit down and listen to everyone. So Commissioner, I'm so happy for you to join us. Do you want to say something? Christine, can you unmute him?
I did.
Oh,
I'm unmuted now, I think. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Sorry, I'm on a few minutes late, just getting off a call. Thanks for your engagement. The design of this park and how we move forward in this process is all based on the community feedback that we received during this process. So we'd love to take it all back, whether it's has to do specifically with the playground area and the stuff we're talking about, or if it's stuff on the side. I'm happy to take emails and to address separate conversations of how we can move things forward. But your engagement tonight is really important, and that's what's going to drive this process forward. So thanks for joining, and happy to listen in.
great. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, and then I want to introduce the design team. So CDM Smith design team, we have Bob Button, Glenn Howard, Mike Dodson, John Bronincont, and Rachel Guilfoyle. You know, I would love to introduce everyone separately, but I just have to say this team is outstanding. And CDM Smith has been part of Millennium since the very beginning when this park was converted from a landfill to a park. So we have experts not only in the areas of landscape architecture and engineering, but experts in park infrastructure and development of open space. So we are in good hands for this playground renovation. Next slide. So the park lifetimes. So this is kind of an illustration of what happens with a park. This goes with many parks where we establish a park. For instance, with Millennium Park, it was first, as I mentioned, a landfill. And then in 2000, it became this amazing park that you see today. But I think as the process, so we go from design and construction, it becomes part of, once we're finished with construction, it goes into the maintenance status. So it's really maintained, and we have supplemental contracts up at Millennium. Also during that time, we really utilize 311, which is a huge resource. If you don't know what it is, you can simply call 311 or use the 311 app. And it's a great tool to communicate your parks related concerns and issues. Well, city and parks related concerns and issues. So I encourage you to use that tool. And then we go back to design and construction again. So this really is, it's not just, the design and construction isn't the end of it. It goes through this whole other process, and then we come back again years later. Next slide. There's also a lot of considerations guiding park design, which include City of Boston priorities, community input, such as tonight, safety and regulatory guidelines, and our own parks and recreation goals, which support City of Boston priorities. We bring all those things together, and our design team brings their listening skills, expertise, and creativity to create a fantastic park design. Next slide. During the project planning, we prioritize expanding park access, addressing equity and climate resiliency, promoting public health, and building strong communities. Next slide. We also prioritize park-specific goals, which overlap with the city priorities and include the creation of parks which are accessible and available to all, provide diverse and balanced programming, promote meaningful and inclusive community engagement, create adaptive and resilient landscapes, and promote connection both physically within the neighborhoods, but also between neighbors. Next slide. For the Millennium Park project, our scope of work includes improvements to the playground, pathways, and a restroom feasibility study. Specifically, the team reviews existing conditions and uses, identifies new playground elements reflective of the community, and translates this into a plan to upgrade the playground, safety surfacing, and access. The team will also assess feasibility of a new restroom facility and replace and repair damaged pathways or parking areas. I want to also acknowledge that I've heard from several people about the potential for a dog park or community gardens in Millennium. Our current Millennium Park project funding is specifically earmarked for the playground, pathways, and restroom. The scope and budget was voted on and approved by the City Council, so Boston Parks cannot reallocate this funding for another use, such as a dog park or community gardens. Boston Parks does recognize the need to provide space for all, and as such, we are working towards having a dog park in every neighborhood. Perhaps Millennium is an ideal spot in West Roxbury. We haven't looked into it yet. However, tonight we will not be focusing on this. We only have 3 meetings to gather community feedback, and it's important to focus discussion on our current scope. However, if you are interested in furthering this conversation, which I know many of you are, please reach out to me directly. Again, my email is Allison, ALLISON, .Perlman, PERLMAN, @boston.gov. And you can simply go to the project website and you can find my email there too. And I'm happy to figure out how we move these really important issues to you, whether it's the community garden or the dog park. Happy to take that conversation offline and figure out strategies to move those conversations forward. Okay, next slide. Since this project includes a playground design, I wanted to go over a few items we look for to help diversify play for all abilities. There are 5 elements of inclusive play which we consider as a playground design is developed. It's important to meet all these elements to ensure we are creating a vibrant play experience for all children and all abilities. Next slide. These 5 elements include social and emotional, physical, sensory, cognitive, and communication. Oftentimes, we will look for each play feature to meet many of these elements in order to expand the play value for kids. Later in the presentation, you will see a few precedent images which highlight some of these elements. Next slide. Prior to this meeting, our team has reviewed the existing conditions, which really means walking through the playground and pathways, talking with city staff to figure out what is out there right now and the condition. We are here now with community meeting number 1 to discuss what the team has found and hear your insights from using the park and listen to your interests and concerns. This meeting will be followed by our team creating a few different preliminary design ideas based on what we hear tonight. We will come back for community meeting number 2 sometime in March, where we share the design ideas with you and hear your thoughts on each of them. Our team regroups again, further develops a design, and returns for our final community meeting in April or May, where we say, this is what we heard, did we get it right? Hopefully we get consensus and we move forward with the construction documents where we detail the design so contractors can bid on the project for construction. If all goes well, we anticipate construction to start in the fall of 2021 and reopen in fall 2022. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to CDM Smith and Bob Button.
Good evening. Thank you, Allison. Can you all hear me? Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Button. I've been with CDM Smith. I'm a vice president and civil engineer. I've been with CDM Smith for approximately 30 years. 26 of those years, I've been working with my colleague, Glenn Howard, on the Millennium Park site, and I'm very excited to be here with you tonight. You can see the wonderful facility here in one of the aerial photos that we've taken over the lifetime and some of the spectacular views of the neighborhoods and of the city of Boston itself. I'm very happy to be here with Glenn Howard and other members of our team tonight to talk about the project. Here's another spectacular view showing some of the completed work, not only of the original Millennium Park site, but also the 14 acres that we were able to bring online at the former school site in 2015. Another very exciting project that we were involved in and something that we're all very proud of. In addition, there's several hundred acres of passive recreation areas and open space, and like many areas of Boston, great views of the Charles River. So we're very excited about that. Many folks don't realize that the Millennium Park site was actually operated as the former Gardner Street landfill from the 1940s through the 1980s. As part of the investigation work in the 1995 era, myself and some of my colleagues were out and identified the limits of waste and worked to identify other environmental conditions and requirements for closing the landfill. In addition, we worked with Alice Hennessy and a Citizens Advisory Committee on the vision for Millennium Park. And in 2000, the Millennium Park facility was dedicated, a very exciting day. It brought more than 100 acres of open space and park area to the city, larger than the public garden and common combined. One of the photos here on the bottom right shows folks the promenade or the point of the landfill, and the black mound is actually textured HDPE liner that was used to close and cap and protect folks to use the park. And we've worked with the city to complete monitoring of the site since it was opened and continued to this day. The cap itself is made up of several layers, as you can see from the graphic on the left-hand side. And this photo here shows several pictures of the construction starting back in 1997 through November 2000. I draw your attention to the two photos here on the left corner. Those show the various layers of the cap. Again, the HDPE liner, sand and drainage layers, the loam, and then the grass. And these photos show a nice timeline of the park construction from roughly 1997 through 2000. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Glenn Howard, and have him talk more about the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Allison. Again, I'm Glenn Howard. I'm a landscape architect. Very, very privileged to be working on this project again. I can say it was definitely one of the highlights of my career when we capped and closed the landfill and converted this into the recreation space it is. I'm a resident of Boston, and I get out here on a regular basis. We were involved in the upgrade of the West Roxbury High School facility in 2015. And I know both facilities, people share both of them. So the main scope, as Allison said on this, we're primarily, the exciting part is really looking at the playground facility, understanding this is a regional park. It's become a regional park, and the playground facility has been there for 20 years. So that's the primary component I think most people are excited about. As Allison mentioned, we've already pretty much walked every foot of the pathways and parking lots and roadways and noted the condition of everything, and repaving or replacing or whatever we need to do, that'll be part of this project. And then just coming up with a concept plan for a restroom facility, which I'll talk a little bit about. Next slide, please. So a very important piece of any project we do, we call it the site analysis. Anyone who's been to one of the public process for a Boston project realizes that we do this on every project. It's a key to making sure we understand all the aspects of the surroundings of each site, what's going on the site. We're very, very lucky on this one. Like I said, we were involved in this 20 years ago. So we're pretty familiar with everything. This slide is a bird's eye view, and I'm going to just quickly walk through some of the key elements. The park sits about 80 feet above the surrounding grade. That was kind of the finished elevations we ended up around. The property adjacent to the park is primarily mostly undeveloped. There's hundreds of acres of conservation land to the east. There's the dump shoreline urban wild, which was not actually part of the landfill back when we closed it, but there was a lot of waste that was in that area. So our plans really had a big component of cleaning that up and pulling all the material out of there. And I don't remember, a lot of cubic yards of tires and all sorts of of machinery and things came out. So that's really become a really nice naturalized area of the park. And like I said, that's called the dump shoreline urban wild. The West Roxbury urban wild is another natural area that's, I think everybody sees that when you're going by on the VFW. It's all the marshland that kind of is in between the VFW and the school and over towards the cemeteries. There is a threatened species on our site that we have to consider, which is the bobolink bird. The entrance to the park is from the VFW highway. The 36 bus provides public access with a drop-off. Adjacent to the bus stop is the fairly new sports complex that we did 5 years ago at the high school that we're also fortunate enough to work on. To the left of the red arrow at the entrance is the Department of Public Works facility, and a Boston Parks maintenance facility is in there also. Being 80 feet above the surrounding grade, it's pretty windy on the site. I get a lot of questions. I've had, after 20 years, I've had people ask me, how come the trees that you guys have out there are so short after 20 years? And part of it's the fact that it's on a landfill, but it's, it gets very windy if you've been up there. And that also is one of the factors on why the trees have been slower to grow. So we get the north, west and east winter winds, and we get the nice south west cool breezes in the summer. Further to the left is the canoe launch into the Charles River that we put in as part of phase 1 or the original park. The dark parallel lines that you see kind of going all around, those represent the steeper slopes. They're mowed once a year, and the depth to the cap of the landfill is only 2 feet over most of those areas. So you won't see trees growing up. I get that question a lot too. How come the slopes haven't naturalized? How come it's not forested? They have to mow that. That's part of a Department of Environmental Protection requirement. So you won't see trees growing in there, and that's something we have to always take into consideration. The orange dash lines represent the access roads and pathways. We have over 2.5 miles of walking and jogging trails and over 350 spaces for cars in the parking lots. Like I said, we've already in the fall, before the snow hit, we kind of walked out and documented the condition of all the pathways and all the paving that's out there, since that is one of the parts of this project. Within the dashed line, you can see the green spaces. They represent the numerous soccer fields that we have in the park. And then the dark circle in the center is what we're all excited to talk about tonight, which is the existing playground that we'll be looking to renovate. Next slide, please. So this is a zoomed in image of the playground area. One logistical point for those who are on their computers, there is a small double line on the right of the presentation. It's 2 vertical little lines. We don't plan on zooming in or out of any of these slides, but you can actually click on those double lines and you can enlarge or reduce the size of the presentation slides. If you can't see something, you might be able to zoom in on your own. So something to keep in mind. The brown area is the existing playground. When we designed this 20 years ago, we separated the play structures by age group. We had an area for 5 to 12-year-olds, an area for 2 to 5-year-olds. We also had a separate area for swings. Each area was completely enclosed with a 4-foot high chain link fence. This was very common back in the 90s. A lot of the playground manufacturers produced equipment that was geared very specifically for age groups. And usually on most cases, especially in urban parks, they were fenced in. In this case, we do have the parking area down the south. We have shade structures with benches and some picnic tables outside the fenced-in play areas. The dark red dashed line is the parking lot, and that's where the accessible entrances are to the entire park, from this parking lot anyway. The green space just above the parking area is an area we looked at 20 years ago as a possible location for a future restroom building. When the landfill was closed, we did add a water line and a sewer line to that location, just in case the Parks Department ever did want to consider adding a restroom. And as I mentioned, this is something we will be looking at just at a conceptual level. And we're going to be asking for your input on that also tonight. We understand that Parkway Soccer and other groups use this area to assemble and to check in during events. So we want to make sure that anything we do, that'll be taken into consideration and that space would still be utilized and available for those activities. The lighter orange dashed lines, those are the walking and jogging trails. The dark parallel lines, as I mentioned earlier, those are the steeper slopes. You can see the soccer fields labeled on this slide that surround the playground area. The big yellow arrows, Bob mentioned the views we have of both the city and of the conservation land, so that's what those are. Finally, those red squiggly lines just to the, just at the top from the playground, those are what we call desire lines. And over the years, we've had a lot of people that are going back and forth between field B and the playground. They're not, you know, it's a little out of the way to go up and around the pathway. So people have been going up and down. There's some of those on the other end of the park too, by the overlooks. Those concern us because, as Bob mentioned, you know, this is a capped landfill, and I mentioned those slopes only a couple of feet to the liner. So we want to definitely take that into consideration and think about what we can do to improve that situation in the design. So we've listed, typically when we do a site analysis, come up with what we call an opportunities and constraints matrix. I've just highlighted a few things to talk about tonight. The constraints are really the depth of soil above the landfill cap, as I noted. On the next slide, I'll show a little more detail on that. Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection is going to have to approve any improvements we do since this is on a cap and a closed landfill. And then we always, you know, the Boston Parks and Recreation Maintenance Department always really likes to review our plans and get involved in some of the improvements we're doing, just to make sure that what we're doing isn't going to put an overburden on the maintenance activities. So we have a lot of opportunities here. Like I said, when we designed this, the whole thinking of how playgrounds were designed has changed a lot in 20 years. There's an opportunity to provide more inclusive play here, add more play opportunities to meet the needs of developing children of all ages and abilities. We can utilize custom play structures. 20 years ago, everyone was really putting in, you know, prefabricated structures from the manufacturers. We've started to go back to using a lot more natural elements to customize different activities and components for kids to play on in conjunction and in addition to more structured play. We do have a desire to create, you know, this has become a regional destination. So we'd like to really design a facility with your input and understanding what you want to really make this a destination playground. And then to expand the play area to include the slope, potentially, if the budget allows, to include that slope that I was talking about. We know there's some issues on it with the desire lines and the people coming and going. I'm going to show some pictures of some playground examples where they've used slopes to incorporate play features and other equipment. And then just to increase access and exploration while maintaining safety. Everything we do, safety, you know, obviously comes up as a big question. You're going to see some pretty exciting examples that I'm going to show. We have a certified playground safety inspector on this team, so anything we do will be reviewed by them as we go. They'll be involved from the very beginning, from our conceptual planning right through the bidding and construction documents. So with that, I think you can go to the next slide, please. So this is just looking a little more detail. Like I said, the equipment was all put in 20 years ago. It's never been replaced. The general equipment, slides and stairs and things like that, are still in pretty good shape, but you can see the roofs have really suffered a lot of damage. The equipment is fairly dated. A lot of the surfacing in the area is the 5-bar surfacing that we put in, and that's no longer considered an accessible surface. The actual safety rubber surfacing is you know, it's gotten worn out. It needs to be replaced. The chain link fence is surprisingly that's around these play areas is still in pretty good shape. I was surprised when we really took a detailed look at this. And then this was all set in a concrete curb that really defined those areas. The big black line that goes through the plan here, we can just jump to the next slide and I can explain this a little bit. I just want to reiterate the issue we have with the landfill liner. This graphic kind of shows you it's a cut through the playground. So you can see on one side of the playground, we're much closer to the liner because the playground is flat and the liner actually slopes down at 3 to 5%. As you get around to the edges, there's more we can do when it comes to footings and foundations for structures. Anything we put in is going to have a concrete foundation on it. In this case, when we did this, the shallower footings, we actually had a specialized sill footing detail. So we were able to do some more creative things below the grade. This is also why you see a lot of the trees and everything out there growing along the edges, because they've got 5 to 6 feet worth of soil above the cap for the landscaping to grow. Next slide, please. So the next several slides are examples of parks, mainly in Boston, that have more recent renovations. We're just going to show a few things to try to get everyone excited and show some ideas and get some input. We haven't started thinking about anything on this site. That's not what we're doing yet. We really want your input and feedback. This is your park. I want to try to talk, Allison mentioned the 5 elements of play. So as we're going through the 3 or 4 of these, I'm just going to reiterate what she said and maybe just expand a little bit. The first one she talked about was social and emotional. So what does that mean? A lot of older play equipment is very structured and didn't leave a lot up to the kids' interpretation. There are a lot of options these days with playhouses, elevated sky boxes. You can create a forest-themed playground or a river-themed playground and include elements that allow kids to discover and use the structures in a way they imagine. We also can add a lot of custom and natural materials, steps and slopes and granite blocks and create specialized elements for kids to climb on. Might not even be something specific and just be something the kids can envision, whatever the kids want to envision them to be. The next element is physical. This includes equipment that helps with strength building and developing motor skills, flexibility. We want to provide different degrees of challenge for kids of all ages, abilities, and even kids with disability. We want to make sure that there's elements included for them. Next slide, please. The third one that Allison mentioned is sensory. This includes elements in the playground maybe that have different colors or different textures. Kids learn a lot through seeing and touching elements. Also movable objects or reactionary objects. So by doing one thing, something else happens in the playground. So spinning objects, seesaws. There's a lot of new safe equipment with a lot of exciting features, spinning and seesaws. At one time, we didn't put seesaws in anymore in playgrounds, but now a lot of the equipment, they've designed them to be very safe and fun and reactionary. The fourth one is cognitive. That's similar to sensory, includes rope climbing, play equipment that links one thing to another, things that allow kids to master an activity. Different challenges that provide a sense of accomplishment when they've actually completed a climb or another finishing spinning through something. Next slide, please. And the last one is communication. I think of this communication as equipment and features that help kids play together and learn from each other. Equipment they have to share, again, like seesaws and slides, even slopes with steps and climbing features where, one kid can get up to the top and encourage his friend to join him, go through the same experience. Next slide, please. I included this slide. I was talking earlier about what we did 20 years ago, which was, create these age separation structures that were age separated, enclosed with chain link fence. Safety obviously is a concern. This picture on the right is Lincoln Park in Somerville. It was done by Wesson and Sampson, and I just think the area on the left was really well done. It's not fenced in, yet it really creates kind of a safe space and a safe play area. You can see they've incorporated elements where parents can actually sit and be included as part of the playground instead of sitting on a bench out on the perimeter while the kids play on the equipment. And then the upper right, you can see where they use natural landscaping and boulders and rocks to create that separation. So it's not fenced in, but it still creates that sense of space and enclosure for the playground. I just was out Sunday, and the one on the lower left I thought was very creative too. They use these kind of blocks that double as kind of a separation safety border. But look how fun that is. The kids can climb around on it at the same time. And then they continue to timber border all the way down. So the space has a defined edge. So parents can, kind of educate the kids that are in there if they're concerned, smaller kids, they can kind of define where the kid can and can't go, where the children play and where they don't, go beyond. So I just threw that in as some interesting ideas for separation. Next slide, please. And finally, we're working on a project right now in a conservation area. And I mentioned themed playgrounds, and this is one where it's near the Charles River, and we are using the Charles River theme as the guiding design element. We proposed the whole playground to have this theme. We're using the playground surfacing, colored blue as the imaginative river. At the beginning, we have an area we're calling the river bank. On one side is a small sand area with a boat wreck. It's split in two. One side is it's accessible to wheelchairs with a digging tool. Again, it's just a small sand area. We have a 3-foot-high landscape berm around it with a tunnel that goes through it. It's an actual wood tree trunk looking tunnel. And 2 other crossings made out of block and made out of wood. So because this is conservation land, we wanted to, from a distance, make sure the whole park was landscaped and natural, but provide some of these elements through the berm and just to make it exciting. Around the outside is a zip line. There's a whimsical cluster of balance elements at the top that are meant to be a forest theme and can double as an outdoor classroom. The river, as it wraps around, we're calling the center an island, which has the main treetop climbing structure. On the other side of the river, we have a 6-foot-high berm that we're building up. That's going to be landscaped on one side, again, keeping with the fact that this is in conservation land. And then the inside is going to be a series of climbing structures and rubber safety surfacing. And there's actually, it goes up 6 feet with an accessible pathway. So even a wheelchair can get up. And then there's a bridge over to the sky structure. And finally, as you pass through the island, we're adding some white color into the blue with a canoe structure to kind of simulate a rough water area. And then the whole playground terminates in what we're calling a whirlpool. And the next slide just shows some of the elements that we're including. And then one more slide, please. Finally, I mentioned, we're not thinking anything yet. We're looking for you to give us input, but if the budget allows and we can actually start thinking about using that slope that I pointed out between Field B and the playground, here's a really great example of a similar size slope and how creative the designer got in adding elements and utilizing that slope for agility and climbing features as well as slides. And next slide. And I think that is it. So I think I can turn it back over to Allison.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. So I think those slides are just to try to start to generate discussion on what would be interesting for you all, especially in particular to the playground, and what you think that your kids would love to see. What would bring you up to Millennium Park, besides what's already happening there with soccer and walking, but what would bring you to bring your kids up to Millennium Park? We would love to hear from you today. I've noticed that there's not too many questions and answers or questions in the question box. So if something comes up, you have questions about the playground or pathways or restrooms, we'd love to hear it. We'd love to hear why a restroom facility is important to you, or are the pathways meeting your needs, or you like the playground the way it is, but you would like to see more of slides or whatever. So, this is an open discussion, and really no question or comment is ridiculous. So we'd love to hear it, especially if you have kids in the room. Get them on there and sharing their ideas. But I think we have a couple questions in the question and answer. So thank you for bringing the engagement strategy up too. It's easy. You just either click on the icon for the question and answers and type it in, or you can raise your hand and we can verbally call on you. So I'm going to turn over to John. He's going to help moderate, and Christine's going to help moderate. So John, do you want to look at the questions and answers?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just, before you start, I wanted to acknowledge Paul Sullivan is here from Councillor Flaherty's office. So thank you for joining us. So go ahead, John.
Okay, so the first question we have is directed towards Glenn. And the question is, are the trees that were planted in Millennium Park native species? If not, would you consider replacing them with native species?
I think most of the ones along the perimeter are white pines and oaks. There's no plan currently to be replacing any plant species, but I would say that as part of the playground design, we would definitely be looking to include native species. Like I said, in some of those examples, we'd like to include more natural elements in the design, especially to create some of the borders and some of the separation that I discussed. Native species would definitely be a priority there. Replacing any plant materials over the entire park or anything really wouldn't be part of this project at this time.
And I would add to that too, as well, Glenn, that because it's a landfill, we have to look at how the trees root and the specific types of trees and what depth of cap exists in those areas. So in addition to looking at the types of plantings, the specific locations are also critical.
And another question that kind of bounces off that is looking to have more trees to provide shade and bring nature to life.
Yep, we can do that. Just like Bob said, we need to, as we get a little more, if we get further along in the concept for the playground, that's definitely something we'd want to be doing. And we'd have to look at the overall layout for the playground, the depth of the cap. And, but yes, it's definitely something that would provide a positive features to the playground.
And can I just add on to that shade is really important as we're seeing the days are getting hotter and hotter, and we're trying to expand tree canopy. So we're really interested in wherever we can, where there opportunities are that are feasible to be adding trees. And I think playgrounds are a great place for trees because it gets so hot. And as a parent sitting there on the bench, I need some shade, and then my kids do too. So it's definitely something that we consider with every project.
I'm going to jump to let someone speak. David, you can unmute yourself and just be sure to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm David Ween. I live in Roslindale, but we very often come to the to Millennium Park, and my friends do as well. At these meetings, I always find that I seem to always be out of scope, but I'm going to bring up a few items that are out of scope. One of them is there's a need to improve the canoe landing. The canoe landing is there, but it's not well used, and it's not well used for a reason. I will confine my comments on that to just that comment, and I'll provide written requests to continue pursuing that to you guys and to the city council members. Second is related to the pathways, and that is sort of in scope. And that is, and I realize we're talking about a capital project, but two friends of mine have been attacked by loose dogs on the pathways while just strolling along. Some of the dog owners seem to feel really, really entitled. And I think that obviously enforcement is important, but that really shows there's a need for a dog park here. And I really urge the Parks Department and the City Council, recognizing it's out of tonight's scope, to pursue this very, very vigorously. It's been many years and there's a huge unmet need. And there's 100 acres or more in the park. You ought to be able to find a couple of acres for that. And I think those were the two areas that I wanted to bring up. And thank you.
Thank you, David. So thanks for bringing up the canoe landing. We'll add it to the list of issues that came up that were out of scope. And please, and please just go ahead and email me about specifically what the issues are. I'd love to understand that better. And then also just the off-leash dogs. I've heard this from so many people, not only here, but at other parks. And I recognize, I think the Parks Department recognizes that it's a big issue, and we're working towards getting a dog park in every neighborhood. So there are avenues to move that conversation forward. There's strategies. And so I'm happy to discuss with people what those strategies are, through a different route, because we would like to focus on the pathways, the restroom, and the playground. So thank you for your comments.
And that answers a few of the questions in the Q&A, because there's a few comments about the dog parks. So moving on to another question. There was a few questions about the slope and including a slide into it. One comment is, could stairs be used along that slope to remove the desired paths? And another comment was that they use that slope for slide and for sledding in the winter. So it might be important just as a slope.
Yeah, the answer to the question is yes. I think if we were able to incorporate play elements, we would also include, a stair that would go up to the top. I think parents would want to be able to get up and down quickly if their kids are going up and down the slope too, without necessarily getting involved in some of those elements. So yeah, a stair can be included. And then we would need to look a little closer at where they're actually sledding and make sure that we don't, if there's something that's out there that's a popular activity, we certainly don't want to be just taking away from that activity.
Hey, Glenn, if I could add to that a little bit with respect to the sledding, I think that's actually occurring farther down the slope as you head down from the lower pathway to the play field itself in more of the grassed area. And as long as it isn't damaging to the cap and we're creating erosion, I think the sledding is a fine use. And we could look at potentially extending stairways to connect the play field areas with the playground itself. It's something that we've been working with the park maintenance staff on in a couple of areas at the site. And we can take a look at that as well.
So we also got a few questions on bike paths and having a dedicated bike path versus having drawings and lineage on the ground to separate pedestrians from bicyclers throughout Millennium Park.
Allison, you want to take that?
Sure. I think what I'm understanding the question to be is that someone would like additional paths on top of what paths are already out there to add another pathway system for bikes. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm pretty sure, and I may have to bump this to Tom, but I'm pretty sure that we don't allow bikes in the park. Is that correct, Tom?
Allison, well, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, no, I was unmuting. Yeah, currently not supposed to have bikes on the walking paths. The signs have the chart for how long the walk is, and it's supposed to just be a walking path. I know some people do bike on it, but not supposed.
And I would add to that as well, Allison, that to try to install new pathways or additional pathways on those slopes would be very prohibitive because of the landfill liner underneath. You wouldn't be able to construct them in accordance with DEP regulations. It would be prohibitive.
Okay.
We also wouldn't be able to widen those, we really wouldn't be able to widen the perimeter path at the bottom, especially along the wetlands. You pretty much hit the toe of slope immediately with the width that we have now.
Okay. Thank you.
The mid-slope path was actually excavated out of the waste in order to create it and to create stormwater controls. So we physically made the pathways that are there by shaping the underlying soil. That's why it's so challenging to add or change any of them. We are looking at resurfacing them and doing things to make the walking and exercise experiences better along the pathways, but additional ones wouldn't be possible.
Great, thank you. So it seems like there's a lot of comments that are in favor of restrooms. It's important if one wants to spend hours at Millennium Park or has small children. One question was, what goes into determining the feasibility of a restroom at Millennium Park? And that go to Glenn or Bob.
Bob, you want to take that?
Sure. So as Glenn had indicated during the presentation, one of the things that we did do initially was we actually created where the water bubbler is. We brought water up so that there would be the potential to add water for flushing the toilets and washing hands and that type of thing. And as Glenn indicated, we did bring a sewer pipe and conduit up for electricity. So we've done some legwork to create restroom facilities. What we would be looking at would be the number and configuration of the restrooms, family restroom opportunities, how they would be constructed. I think, Allison, you had some examples from other park facilities you were speaking about the other day. So we would look to create some concepts in terms of what the building and the area could look like and maintain some of the gathering spaces and whatnot that you were describing, Glenn. So it would be a series of renderings and options to show folks. And then from that, we would be able to help the Parks Department develop cost estimates for constructing them. One thing that'll be very critical is any type of building on a landfill structure would require venting systems and monitoring systems. The high school building and the parks and DPW building all have specialized monitoring systems and barriers in them because of their closeness or their proximity to the landfill. So those would all be part of the considerations that would go into the study and looking at how much space is available and what can be accommodated. Allison, did you want to add any more to that?
No, but I did want to, there's a comment in here about the concern of the bathrooms and methane and that there's, a rule of no closed buildings on site. So I want to reiterate that if we did a restroom facility up here, we're definitely very aware of any of these issues, and we would make sure that we are well within safety guidelines because kids are using this, families are using this, and older folks are using this, and we're clearly not going to build anything that there's a safety concern.
And all of the work that we do, whether it's the restroom facility or even just changing out the playground equipment, resurfacing the pathways, all of that work requires review and approval by Mass DEP, so that once we finalize our concepts and plans, we'll be working with them for their approval of the work as well.
I would love to hear, on people that are using the restrooms or the porta potties now up there, they're using them. What have been the issues? How I think that there's typically 2 restrooms up there, maybe 3 during the season. And so if there's any issues that you found, just minus the fact that it's a porta potty, we'd love to hear that feedback as well.
So we have a few questions about the fencing, and if you remove fencing, how will you keep kids contained versus like keeping people out of the playground area, like people walking their dogs versus the kids playing in the area and separating kids from the parking lot. So I was wondering, Glenn, if you could talk a little bit more about separation.
Yeah, I would like to. I see a few of these comments. So, this is another item that we really want your feedback on. I showed some pretty successful examples of natural barriers. In some cases, those parks that those photographs were taken from, the fencing is actually out more at the perimeter of the park. So in a situation like this, maybe the new fencing would go out towards the parking lot and create that so the kids couldn't get too far, couldn't get out into the parking lot. It could be gated there. going the other direction, you've got the, it goes towards the fields. Typically, the fencing is really to protect kids from a real safety hazard. But we really want to hear from you if people think that the fencing is required and they prefer a real solid fence rather than natural barriers. In some of these areas, obviously, if we were going to include play equipment and features on the slope, that would become part of the actual playground. So maybe the fence is down at the toe along the pathway. So if kids go down the slope and take a slide or something, they don't go beyond that pathway. They don't run out onto the field. So yeah, it takes some work. It's got to be well thought through. But again, when you use natural elements, there is going to be the potential. If you take your eyes off a small child, that if you're not keeping an eye and he goes through and he can get out, it can happen. Or, we can also stick to only doing that for some of the equipment that is for larger, for older kids, and, keep an area for smaller kids and utilize fence to provide more protection there.
I want to add too, it's not one or the other. There's ways to utilize fencing closer to the parking area, and then ways to use more kind of enclosures, that allow kids to go explore more and, around the slope and everything. So there's a combination of things that we could do, but it is great, as Glenn mentioned, to hear from you guys, what's important.
So we have another question just asking, are you planning to expand the playground area? Can you reiterate where you think the restroom would go? During soccer seasons, we use a grassy area near the playground as an admin area with a view off to the lower fields and a part of the top fields. We would request a fixed canopy there. So this is kind of the area where the restrooms were located, and they were just wondering if you could kind of explain the location of the buildings.
Maybe I could go to the rendering, Glenn. I'll just go up a couple of slides
Sure.
as a way of showing folks that. Just
While
bear
you're
with-
doing that, we haven't come up with any concept yet, but I did mention in part of my presentation that, we understand that area is currently utilized for checking in for events. So we'd want to, anything we do, we would design it in a way that still allowed for a plaza space or something, enough of an open space for those types of activities. Some initial thoughts had come to mind even about, maybe separating it into a couple different structures with a canopy between the buildings, between the two structures that would allow for kind of a covered space.
And then Glenn, I think I just also wanted to point out there is this performance area here and bandstand area that we had created. And, there's some potential for opportunity to do things there as well as, some of the slopes and other areas that we spoke about earlier.
Yeah, but I do want to just reinforce, we understand how important that space is, and we would definitely, any proposal we come up with in the concept planning, we will take into account that we need some open space, gathering space as part of that layout. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Glenn, another question. We also have a few comments about the picnic tables. It seems like they're a hot commodity, and people were wondering if we could expand the picnic tables or have like a snack bar grilling area included.
I can't
This
really
might be a
comment on
question
a
for
grilling,
Allison.
but yeah, but the picnic table, sure. I mean, I definitely, as part of this whole renovation, if the playground, there's quite a bit of area for this playground to expand. And if we expand into an area where we're impacting a picnic table that's there now, we can always add some additional picnic tables. I read that comment. I like the idea of, even adding 2 or 3 picnic tables that are out a little bit more, that are to take advantage of the views. So I don't see why we couldn't. And then Allison, I don't know if you've thought about, grills and that kind of activity.
Glenn, let me try to answer that. With respect to a landfill, open fires and grilling and barbecues on top of a landfill would be prohibited, most likely by DEP. So any kind of cooking and setup like that would most likely not be viable on this site because of the landfill.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to note that the picnic tables right now, I go up there all the time, and for a really long time, I didn't even know that they were there because they're kind of tucked back. So yeah, I think it makes sense, to be thinking about if there's ways that we can add amenities that are closer to the playground, maybe, on the other side where families could gather and eat snacks or, whatever, people can rest. And then in terms of, the grills, I think Bob is spot on in terms of fires. And I think that, bringing a vendor up here would be really challenging as well. I know that the ice cream truck comes up there a lot and it's well loved, but I'm not sure that there's enough activity up here except on big soccer tournament days to kind of warrant a permanent vendor.
Allison, there's a question about, is there a way for kids to submit ideas on the playground?
Yes, absolutely. I am open to ideas of how to get the kids involved. It's really hard right now with COVID, and so our typical kids workshop is just not feasible. But I'm more than happy to. Kids are really savvy on their computers now, especially with online learning. I know my kid's 8, and he's just outstanding at searching and finding ideas. So if your kids want to participate, they're welcome to send ideas to us. Just send them, via my email, again, which is allison.perlman@boston.gov. And we absolutely take them serious because they're the ones that know what they want to use. I'm not using the playground, the kids are, so we're happy to take their comments.
Great, thank you. Now, so there are a few questions back about the bike path, and so I just wanted to have you reiterate, Allison, that there is signage posted prohibiting bikes on Millennium Park.
Yeah, the signage would be with the rule sign, so that's where you'll see the no off-leash dogs, clean up after yourself, and the no biking, and those are posted throughout the park. People often don't see them, but we post them pretty regularly on the fencing. I believe they're up on the fencing next to the parking lot. I'm not sure, Tom Timmons, do you know where else they're placed within the park?
So it says no vehicular access, and there's also signs that clearly identify them as walking loops. So I'm not sure that biking is addressed. And I know sort of like the no off-leash dogs, some people bike. So, but they're supposed to be for walking.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So there are a few questions about the restrooms. There's a few concerns about the restrooms being dirty or unsanitary, and do we have the budget to clean these restrooms regularly? Another question about the restrooms is the hours. Porta potties are open all the time versus restrooms and buildings usually have certain hours, which make it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I can answer that. So that's part of the feasibility study as well, is looking at, how much would the facility cost and then how much would it cost to maintain it? We clearly don't want to build a restroom that we can't maintain. Right now, we clean the porta potties 3 times a week. And I think that, we would really have to look into that and think about what is the real maintenance cost of the restrooms up here. And then also the hours would be part of that too, of thinking about, feasibility, who's going to be shutting and, opening the restrooms and what does that look like? And, are they closed in the winter? Oftentimes we have to shut down the water because of the winter and freezing. So just, taking all of those things into consideration.
Great, thank you. There are some questions and concerns about, I believe it's field B, which is regularly flooding. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about the scope of that.
Yeah, Bob's familiar with that. We've had some issues there in the past and we've done some remediation, but Bob, you're probably more familiar with what we did do out there than I am.
Yeah, we've had to, over the years, as the loam gets really compacted, some of the drainage challenges with the water going through the loam layer and into the sand have existed. We've also had a couple of areas over the 20 or so years, again, recognizing that there's 80 feet of trash under this site in many, many areas where settlement has caused some localized ponding. We try to work with Tom Timmons and the maintenance folks to address those. A couple of years ago, you may have recalled someone got into the park and did some real damage to one of the fields. And we used that opportunity to correct some of those drainage issues. So we're constantly trying to address those. And we do recognize, I think you'll see quite a few of them will show up in this area here. And we're continuing to work with the Parks Department on ways of filling in those localized drainage challenges.
Great, thank you. So we have a few, it seems like the fencing is coming back up. There's a few people who think fencing is a must. It should at least be around the younger kids area to enclose them in. And then other people think that natural barriers are much better. I don't know if you wanted to talk any more about fencing.
Well, can I just add that I think it's really hard. It's great to hear both sides of it and hear that everyone's interested in it. And I think that, it's hard to understand it until you really start to see the design starting to develop. So I think that maybe, it'd be helpful for the design team to come back at our next meeting and kind of present some options that show fencing, others that are kind of hybrids, so that you guys can respond to those to see like really how the natural barriers would work. But Glenn, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's a good point. Our next step is going to be to go back and come up with at least 3 concepts. And we do have a design charrette among our team planned over the next couple of weeks. So we'll start generating those ideas. And this is what we were hoping to see, comments on both sides and understanding the needs that are being represented here in these questions. So thank you.
Thank you. There was another comment about creating a connection that is needed to Cutler Park across the river. People currently cross the rail bridge, which is super risky in several ways.
So we do have connections to some of the urban wild areas and some of the MDC reservation areas, the bridge that exists along Sawmill Brook. A bridge crossing across the Charles River in this area would be very challenging. I'm not even sure on the other side of the river, the land is actually in Boston. That might actually be Dedham or Needham along there. So I think that that issue presents its own set of challenges that are clearly beyond the scope of this project. Allison, I don't know if you want to add more to it, but that's in another town even, I believe, on the other side of the river.
Yeah, so I struggle with that answer because it's like I get that it's hard when we're like, well, it's not Boston, so, but it may be a good idea. I don't know. So I'm happy to. We have an Urban Wilds project manager who's really fantastic and has been doing a lot of work down there, and so I'm happy to kind of bring these issues to light. And he's really great about reaching across boundaries and starting to understand some of these. So I'm happy to take this back to him and see what he has to say. But it is out of scope, so it would have to be a separate thing.
Great, thank you. There's a few questions about theme play, specifically in the playground. Could there be elements that use wind, or because this is a native bird habitat, could there be some bird watching or natural bird related elements in the playground? This would probably be for Glenn.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, something that we should be thinking about as part of our concept planning. I'll definitely add that to the team as a comment that came out of this.
I believe there's several birdhouses and whatnot, Glenn, that have been placed through this slope as well. Yeah. So that'd be kind of neat to tie the two together potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is it possible to include exercise structures for seniors in the playground?
Well, I'd love to take that one. So I'm not sure, Bob, if you want to call up a picture and So we have an exercise station that's a little bit further down.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that'll show up best, Glenn. Bear with me just a second.
It might not show up on the.
Maybe in this photo here. So at the end of this parking area, when the park was originally constructed, there's a I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 exercise stations that exist in that area. One of the things that we had chatted about during some of the planning for this meeting and along the pathways is opportunity to create maybe some workout stations or exercise stations along the pathways as part of the resurfacing. So any of those options I think are open as long as we can make them work within the project budget. So Glenn, if you had more.
Well, just that one exercise station is, that was put in the same time as the playground was. So, we'd have to talk to Allison. And again, as you mentioned, if we can fit it within the current scope and budget, I think we could upgrade, with some equipment. And if it was geared towards seniors, I think that would be something that we could look at.
I think, Glenn, you had made some observations about some of the benches and seating areas that can be incorporated into the playgrounds as a way of allowing parents, but I'd also say parents and grandparents to enjoy the playground experience with the children and grandchildren.
Yeah,
that's another area as well.
Yep, good point.
So there's a question just about improving signage. Is this something that we can do in our scope?
Sure. I can take that. I may have to bring Tom in too. So it's, it's something that we could include in the scope or we could just work on with the signage team. But I guess the question is improving signage for the bike stuff, or is it for dogs? Maybe we need more dog signage. I know that Tom put up a lot of sandwich boards with keeping dogs on leash. So I would be curious as a response to that, exactly which rules are you referring to, and just needing more signage or being clear with the signage, if we could just get a little more information on that.
Allison, too, if I could also add to that, we worked with Tom last year or the year before to increase and improve and update some of the signs that just give folks guidance around the park as well on some of the pathways and, you are here type of signs. So there may be some opportunities to enhance those as well.
Great.
Bob, there's a question about no closed buildings on landfill sites like previously capped landfill sites due to the methane. I was wondering if you could speak about that.
Sure. We've, again, would work with DEP in their review and approval of those types of conditions. The site itself actually has an active landfill gas collection and flare system. Some folks may notice the stack that exists in the far end of the building itself. The types of restroom facilities that we were looking at may end up elevated above ground so that there's an air gap between the landfill itself and the structure. So that there are design ways that we can work to mitigate the methane gas issue. And as I had indicated, the actual DPW building and parks maintenance facility is located on the landfill property. We dug waste out from underneath it, but this entire slope behind the building is actually solid waste. And we have both protections and barrier systems as well as monitoring in place. And that has been reviewed and accepted by DEP. So part of the feasibility and process we're going through this study would include whatever requirements the DEP may have on that type of structure and facility.
Great, thank you. Tom, I believe this may be a question for you. With the recent snowstorm, do we have the equipment or budget to keep the pathways plowed in the winter?
I'm actually not sure either. I saw that comment. It's up to our maintenance. I'd have to actually check on that myself.
Okay, thank you. Glenn, do you know the current width of the pathways?
10 feet, I believe.
Okay.
Perimeter pathways.
Yeah. Yeah, they were set up that way for access by police vehicles and ambulances and whatnot, as well as maintenance vehicles, in addition to being used for public walkways.
No, there's a comment about we urgently need more trash cans at Millennium. There's a problem and we need more barrels for a cleaner park.
Lauren, if you could give us a little more information, is it like during events or recreation, like soccer games, or is it like all the time? Because we typically do include trash barrels and all of our capital improvement projects, but it's helpful to kind of understand where the real issues are, if it's throughout or if it's just in kind of centralized areas, or we just need to bring more barrels out during a certain season. So if you could provide a little more feedback on that, that would be great.
Thank you.
Folks can feel free to raise their hand also if they want to speak instead of just typing in their answers.
I can follow up on Lauren. She said they take many away during the winter and there are only 2 on the top field. It's a daily thing.
Perfect. That's great feedback, and we can definitely think about that in this improvement project.
Thank you. There is a comment about appreciating integrated seating areas within the play spaces for caregivers, especially if it has incorporated shade/nature. Maggie Daly Park in Chicago does this really well.
Great, thanks for that comment.
So there were a few comments about, could we bring a bike path to connect Millennium Park from the VFW Parkway and to provide bike storage at the entrance of Millennium Park?
Yeah, we should definitely have a bicycle rack at Millennium, and especially the bottom. I don't know how many people are riding up to the top. Maybe they are. I'm super impressed. But there's a lot of kids that do bike, and so we'll definitely consider that. In terms of adding a bike lane, that's more of like a BTD type thing. But they're adding bike lanes all over the city, and so I'm happy to bring this up to BTD and just say that this is kind of a concern from the public that we heard, and they would like to see that happen.
Allison, I might add too, we might be able to, as part of some of the resurfacing work for the roadways in the parking areas, be able to create bike lanes within the site, just not on the pathways necessarily, but still create opportunities, as you had indicated, for folks to bike up to the playground at the top or bike down to the, to the canoe ramp on the site using the roadways and using bike lanes in the roadway as opposed to the pathways. So maybe there's an opportunity to accommodate both in that way.
Great.
So we have a question about maintenance. So we are also concerned about the trails that cross over the bridge into Brook Farm. Is that in scope for paths and maintenance? They are often swamped, muddy, and need some tender loving care. It's hard to walk or run through them in days of rain.
Yeah, is that related to the bridge that we installed?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab at that first, Glenn.
Well, let me, just one thing first, please.
Sure.
So one of the worst areas during our inventory and analysis of the pathways was the area exactly, if that's why I was asking, if that's the area we know that not only is it wet, but you've got the wetland perimeter vegetation roots have been coming under the pavement there. So there is a whole section down along that east side, in and around that bridge and beyond, that we believe is going to need a full pavement restoration and replacement. It won't just be kind of a repaving or paving, like an overlay or anything. There's some sections that have to be taken up and some new stone put down and some root work done and repaved. So I hope that's that.
I was interpreting the question a little different in terms of on the other side in Cutler Park, once you cross over the bridge, to the pathways that exist. And that's a DCR park versus a City of Boston park, number one. And much of that area is within the floodplain. So one of the reasons the folks asking the question are seeing the water in some of those muddy or pathways is that's all within floodplain and within, the Charles River floodplain and all wetlands areas. So any work in that area would require, extensive coordination with Conservation Commission. And we will, even for the pathway repairs that you're mentioning, Glenn, along Sawmill Brook, along the northern or the top part of the site there, we'll be working with Conservation Commission for their approval on those. So just bringing in fill to raise some of those dirt pathways up, it may seem simple, but is a permitting issue and a challenge that is beyond the scope of this project and maybe beyond the scope of any project.
Great, thank you. Alison, there's a comment about permits on the sports fields and enforcing the permits. People are using the space without a permit or using more space than the permit allows.
Yeah. So I'm not part of the permitting department. I'm design and construction. I'm happy to bring this up to the director of permitting. I think it's really important that if you are permitting the space and there's issues, that you reach out to the permitting department and make sure they're aware of it, because I feel like oftentimes they're not made aware of the conflicts. So I think, one, just reaching out directly to permitting and say, hey, we had the permit, someone wasn't there, or someone was already there and wouldn't get off, is really helpful for enforcement and making sure that, if they aren't abiding by the rules, then they don't get the permit. So please reach out if you see that issue, and I'll also flag this for the director of permitting.
Great, thank you. There was one comment about considering an area for fishing. Don't know if.
So that's out of scope. I think I don't know. Maybe Glenn or Bob can help me on this, but I mean, we allow fishing, right, at the river.
I was just thinking about that. That is the Charles River, Allison, and I'm not sure what the water quality standards and restrictions may be in the river there with respect to eating the fish. Fishing versus catch and eating them is obviously different. So I would want to look into that a little bit more. And then certainly along Sawmill Brook, this is a landfill site, so we would always encourage people to, if you fish, to throw them back. But beyond that, I'd have to look at specific regulations for fishing in the river in that area. I'm just not familiar with them.
Yeah.
Catch and release was the word I was looking for.
Exactly. So going off the fishing, obviously it would be for a pastime, not for eating. And kids swim and fish all over the side heading towards Dedham. Just an FYI, so you're not aware of that usage.
Yeah, I mean, we see that all over the place where there are postings generally of the water quality, but people still fish. And that's just, that's their decision.
So two more questions about the bike path. One is a 10-foot pathway is actually wide enough for a bike and pedestrian use. I would encourage you to allow biking, as it is one of the few places that kids can ride their bikes without having to worry about cars. And the second comment about biking was, please encourage BTD to use currently one-way Gardner Street for contraflow bike usage.
Yeah, I really wasn't aware of the rules for biking in this park, so I'll go back and take a look at the rules and see what we have there. I agree. There's a few places where we can bring our kids to teach them how to ride bikes, and maybe the top of Millennium is very helpful to teach your kids how to bike. So we'll take a look at that. And yes, I'll definitely reach out to BTD and let them know the comments.
Great, thank you. And there's just one more comment about a simple dog park being fenced off at Millennium Park.
Okay, so as a parent, like I get there's real concern about dogs and your kids. I you know, even when I'm not with my kids, I see some behavior that's just really unacceptable. And also I acknowledge for the dog owners that it's important to get your dogs out there and get exercise. So I get that we need to address the issue. And as I said, we are working towards getting a dog park in every single neighborhood. But sometimes we need a little push. And so I'm more than happy to speak with anybody that's interested in a dog park offline and talk about strategies and how to move that conversation forward.
Thank you. And just one last comment about speed bikers ride on the bottom path, so a bike lane would not be helpful there.
It said would be helpful.
It would be. My apologies.
Great. Okay. And I'm super excited from Erin. I know my daughters are looking forward to a new park at Millennium, so are my kids. So I think we're all very excited to get this going. And again, the comment about how do kids get involved, yes, please let your daughters know if they want to participate in any way. If they even just want to say, I want more swings, I want a great slide, that's great information. So send it my way. And I think we're gonna, I appreciate your guys' time tonight. We just have one more thing on next steps. So could we go to that slide? The very end. So as I mentioned, our team is going to take back what we heard tonight. We're going to evaluate it and then create a few different preliminary design concepts. And we'll then be back for the second meeting sometime in March to share those concepts with you all and hear your thoughts again. I really love the second meeting in particular because we start to dive into the design more and people can start to really grasp what an exciting project this is going to be when it's finally constructed. So, and I encourage you, I appreciate your participation tonight. I encourage you to attend all three meetings because each meeting will be presenting different information and it's really important to hear your thoughts on all three. So for those who attended tonight, you'll be emailed a notification about the next meeting once we have the date finalized. And don't forget that we'll be posting tonight's meeting on the website and we'll be providing the next meeting details on there as well. So thank you for your time tonight. Please reach out to me, as I said, if anything comes up. All of a sudden something popped up in your head later on tonight, just reach out and email me. Again, it's Allison, ALLISON .Perlman, PERLMAN @boston.gov. And I look forward to seeing you at the second meeting in March.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.